I know you were listening to what Gary Myers had to say. Are you okay with taking into account, I guess, second and third hand, what happened in a locker room when determining a player's Hall of Fame candidacy?
Well, I guess I'll say I'm okay with it just because I understand that they have to come up with some reason to do what basically they decided to do, which is make T.O. wait in line. And you have to have something that you point to make him wait in line, as imperfect as it may be. And this idea that there were 5 teams that couldn't wait to get rid of him, Gary's just flat wrong about that. He became a free agent in San Francisco. He was able to leave. He chose to leave. In Philadelphia, they wanted him. It was he who decided he wanted out when they wouldn't redo his contract. If he'd have been a good soldier and not tried to leave, everything would have been fine in Philadelphia. They loved what he did in 2004. This is a de facto waiting line. Marvin Harrison was deemed more worthy to get in simply because he'd waited longer, and now Terrell Owens falls into the line, and he gets in before Randy Moss does. Because, look, these concerns, if they're that significant to keep the guy out now, they should keep him out forever. But that's not the case, and Gary acknowledged it. They need to have an orderly procession of guys into the Hall of Fame, so they've created this waiting line, and then they come up with reasons to justify it. And I'm not saying I have a problem with it. I'm just saying that's what's going on. So if it wasn't that, it would be something else. Jonathan Vilma the other night suggested defenses didn't game plan for Terrell Owens. So if they didn't have the off-field / locker room stuff to point to, maybe that would be the argument. Either way, he wasn't getting in before Marvin Harrison, just like Randy Moss I don't think would get in before Terrell Owens.
Here's a concern I have, Mike. I don't really think it's the Hall of Fame voters' job to – they already are the gatekeeper. I don't think it's their job to be the timekeeper as well. If those guys believe that T.O. is a better candidate than Marvin Harrison, then T.O. is the guy they should elect. And I don't want to go all Chris Carter here because I know he famously said this, but what happens if something happened to T.O.?
Well, look, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm just trying to understand the way it is. It is an imperfect process, and until someone can and is willing to and is able to and has the power to come up with something better, this is what we have. And I think they're striving to create a sense that there is some sort of order and that people don't get overlooked and fall into the cracks, and then they don't get in until they're recommended by the senior committee. So if you pass over Marvin Harrison now for T.O., who does he get passed over for next year, and does Marvin Harrison end up waiting 20 years to get in? And I know, one of the voters told me a couple of years ago, well, I said, why did Randall McDaniel get in? And the explanation was, well, we were concerned if we didn't get him in now, he'd never get in. Well, does that mean that he's more worthy of someone else at that moment? No. It just means they decided now was the time for Randall McDaniel to get in. Look, it's not an easy job. I want nothing to do with it. You give up a full day the day before the Super Bowl, and you've got other demands, and you're going to be criticized no matter what happens. And, bottom line is sometimes there is valid basis for criticism. And on this point, because they always say if there's someone you think should be in, you got to tell us someone that you would leave out. And it's very clear apples to apples here. The argument is you'd leave out Marvin Harrison and you'd put in Terrell Owens. But the truth is there's a waiting line, and the explanation from guys like Gary Myers, I think, is just a way to say something other than, well, we just decided to create a waiting line.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that they have established this waiting line because I don't know when that started. It feels like it started 3 or 4 years ago. I guess philosophically, Mike, are you okay with them considering locker room stuff, but then not considering, like Marvin Harrison, there's a lot of people that believe he did something really, really bad. There's a lot of smoke around Marvin Harrison after someone was murdered in the city of Philadelphia. And, at some level, Harrison was implicated in that. Now, he wasn't charged or anything. I mean, think about that for a second. Gary Myers just said that they didn't want T.O. in because he was a cancer in the locker room. Harrison might have done something much, much worse.
Well, and then let me say this. I'm a firm believer that all things should be considered because it's a hall of fame, not a hall of infamy, not a hall of statistics, not a hall of how many Super Bowl rings you have. And I think when a dad is at the Hall of Fame going through the bus with his kids, you should be able to tell the story of each guy, not when you get to O.J. Simpson and say, oh, let's pass over this one and move on to the next one. So, I think they should be able to take guys out. I think they should be able to keep guys out. I think there should be a high standard when it comes to off-field behavior. But again, that just complicates it. The more factors you put into this, the harder it is to develop a consensus as to what the rules should be. It's so hard now to have an orderly process leaving out the off-field stuff. I think as a practical matter, it makes it a lot more difficult if you throw in the off-field stuff. So I understand why the bylaws say what they say, but these folks aren't robots. At a certain level, I think they are influenced by the off-field stuff. It never comes up because they know it can't come up, but that doesn't mean it's not bouncing around inside their brains.
Talking with Mike Florio, does a terrific job for Pro Football Talk as well as ProFootballTalk.com, Pro Football Talk on NBCSN. He's got PFT Live in the mornings now, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time. I wrote this week, Mike, that I think that if Peyton does play, I think he'll retire probably, but if he does play, I think he's going to be the starting quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams next year. And I guess last night Magic Johnson was trying to convince him of that. Your thoughts on my theory of Peyton to L.A.?
Well, let me tell you, I was struck by the way it all unfolded on Jimmy Fallon's show, because even though Peyton sat there with his head down and the rest of his face turning the shade that the middle of his forehead usually is, my reaction is this isn't happening spontaneously or accidentally. Peyton Manning has everything planned out, and I mean that as a compliment. He always thinks 5 steps ahead. And if he's going to be sliding down the couch for Magic Johnson, he knows what Magic Johnson's mindset's going to be. He knows Magic Johnson was first in line to buy Rams season tickets. He knows there was a report last week that the Rams are interested in Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning can see far enough down the road to know what's going to happen. And I think Peyton Manning knew that was going to happen, and you have to assume he wanted it to happen. Now, is he just having fun? What's his reasoning? Is he trying to squeeze the Broncos to offer him more than whatever lowball figure they'll put on the table if he says, I do want to play next year? I don't know what the motivation is, but the bottom line is this. If he decides he's going to play next year, the next question is how much do the Broncos want to pay him under the $19 million he's due to make next year? And if the number's too low, he says, sorry, I'm not willing to play for that little. He's cut loose. He's a free agent. And of all the teams out there, and I don't know how I'd feel about going into the NFC West with those defenses, but of all the teams out there, the most viable seems to be the Rams.
Yeah, and then the last one I want to make sure to ask you, Mike, we haven't talked about it really at all this week, but the LeSean McCoy situation, there's a video of him, and it's pretty clear he throws a punch in there. A, do you think he'll be arrested? And B, even if he's not, doesn't the NFL have to suspend him for at least one game just because of that video at this point?
Well, it sure looks like the arrest is coming down sooner than later. When you've got off-duty police officers who were sent to the hospital as a result of this incident, something's going to happen. And the NFL now will have its own investigation. It operates on its own track. It's not bound by whatever the criminal justice system does. And I think the thing we need to look at is if he does get indicted, if he does get charged, if he's facing felony aggravated assault charges, how long does it take to resolve these? And is he the next high-profile player who ends up on paid leave when the regular season begins and the Buffalo Bills get the privilege of forking over a huge chunk of money to a guy that they aren't going to have on the football field? So this thing has 7 months to play out before we get to the start of the regular season, but the justice system often moves pretty slowly when you're talking about cases of this nature. What LeSean McCoy needs to have happen is get this all behind him by September, take whatever medicine he's going to get from the NFL, and then come back and play whenever a suspension would end.
Check him out every morning, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern Time on PFT Live. Of course, at night as well on Pro Football Talk, and always at ProFootballTalk.com. Good talking with you, Mike.
All right, Ross. Thanks, pal.